many of you have heard of GitHub? How many of you have used GitHub? A few as well. Scott Chacon is an icon when it comes to GitHub, one of the founders. We're really lucky to have him here with us today. He has since founded a new startup called Chatterbug, based in Berlin with support out of California, that provides, as I understand it, person-to-person language training, which I could probably use for mein Deutsch auszubessern, but we'll talk about that next time. Scott's topic today is about pivoting, whether to pivot or to not pivot, I guess. We've had a lot of topics today that go around change and about self-awareness, and I think that the idea of a business pivot definitely must take that into account, a strong self-awareness in terms of being able to make such a dramatic change. But instead of me babbling on about something I know much less about, I'd like to invite Scott to the stage.
Thanks, sir.
Good luck.
Yep. Hi, everybody. It's nice to see human beings in person. This is the most high-definition Zoom call I've done in months. I'm really excited about it. So, today I'm going to talk about pivoting. My name is Scott Chacon, by the way. Two things you need to know about me, which he already talked about a little bit, is that I was one of the co-founders of GitHub, which was a small startup. There were 4 of us sort of working out of coffee shops. And 10 years later, the company sold for $7.5 billion to Microsoft. And then Chatterbug, which has a slightly different story. But I'm going to go into both of those and talk about pivoting, because what we've had to do lately in my recent company is do a relatively large pivot. And so it's been interesting to me because for the 8 years that I worked at GitHub, which is the first sort of entrepreneurial thing that I did after, for myself, the first company that I helped start and helped run and learned all the ropes, we never really had to pivot. And so every time that I talk about pivoting or I hear people talk about pivoting, I think about it as sort of failure, right? Of not doing something right, not having the right idea, needing to figure out something. And every time that somebody was more positive about it, I was thinking, okay, but like if you had had a good idea to begin with, maybe you wouldn't have to pivot, because I came from this background of never really having to do it. And thinking about it, now that I've had to do it, now that we've been running Chatterbug for a while and looking, not everything kind of works out. It's a normal company, right? You're trying to figure out market fit. You're trying to figure out how do you market this? How do you get customers to have a long lifetime value? How do you get people to continue using it and to find out about it and to tell other people about it? It was nothing that we really had to deal with at GitHub, and so I'm learning the ropes. I kind of did things backwards, right? I had this very successful company, and then a company that I had to work hard at, as opposed to the other way around. And so pivoting is interesting to me because we've had to do it, and looking back at GitHub, we had the opportunity to pivot a lot of different times, and we didn't do it. And it's interesting to me to think about why we didn't do it, because I very easily could see a path where we had pivoted, and our future could be different, maybe for better, maybe for worse. It's impossible to tell. That's the fun thing about business, is that nobody ever knows, right? If you had gone into it a year earlier or a year later, everything could be totally different. And so I want to talk about pivoting, but what I'd really like to think about it as is navigating. Did these monitors sleep as well if I don't switch a thing in a while? Okay, I'll try to speak a little bit faster. I'm not really sure. I have a good amount of slides, so I'm not sure. But I'll just say what's on the slides, and you guys can imagine in your mind's eye what should be on there if they hadn't fallen asleep. So, but what I like to think about this is as navigating, because if you run a company, I think for most of you, if you're running companies, you know that the pivot is one type of navigation, right? There's a lot of different things that you need to do with a company, and sometimes it's important that you pivot, that you turn hard to one direction and you go in a completely different direction, and you move the company in a way that's very difficult and very painful, I think, for everybody. But then there's also sometimes you move the company a little bit, or sometimes you're faced with a decision and you decide not to move the company at all, which can also be a really difficult decision to make. And so what I think is really valuable is to come up with a framework on how to make those decisions, because you will always face those decisions. No matter how big your company gets, whether it's a little startup that's struggling to survive, whether it's a company that's never really had to but is doing well, whether it's a company that's huge, is a Kodak or Nokia, right? And you don't pivot, and your company goes down the drain, right? It's always going to be a choice that you have to make. And so I think it's really valuable to figure out how you're going to make that decision, how you're going to face, do I change the company or do I not change the company, and how much, right? So that it doesn't run aground or something. And I think the most useful compass for that decision-making process is the company vision, to have a vision for what the company is trying to accomplish and make sure that the strategy can change or the way that you're trying to accomplish that thing can change, but the vision for what the company is trying to do should remain the same, that you shouldn't undercut that in order to try to make more money, right? Or to try to make something that isn't true to what your company does. And so I like to think about it as navigation, and I think it's interesting to figure out when do you change course and when do you not change course, because they're both important things to be able to make. So I want to tell you stories from both of my companies, because they're very different. But the underlying theme is the same, of using the company vision to try to figure out how do I change course, when do I change course, and what does that mean for my company. So my first company is GitHub. And GitHub, like I said, and like he said, it ended up being a relatively large company. We bootstrapped the company. There were 4 of us. We were working out of coffee shops. We had no office for several years. We bootstrapped the company with, again, no external investment until we were over 100 employees. So we were making tens of millions of dollars in revenue. We had no debt. We had no VC. We had nobody else on the board. And we started thinking about raising money. But it was a very different place to work from, because what happens when you're in a company like that is that you have hundreds of thousands or millions of users that are paying you money, and you could theoretically provide other services to them, right? You have a network. You have something that you can kind of leverage. And so the question becomes, do I add more services? Do I try to come up with more products that I can sell to these same users, or to users that work around them or are similar to them? Or do I focus on what we're good at and what we've always done and what we've always been good at? And so the question is, did GitHub pivot? And I think the answer is no. GitHub didn't pivot, but that doesn't mean that GitHub never made a decision, right? GitHub had lots of chances to pivot, and GitHub never decided to. And I think it's interesting to figure out why that is and how we came to that decision, and if it was even a good decision. So this, if you can see it, yeah, you can. This is what GitHub looked like in 2009, shortly after we launched, when we were 4 people in a coffee shop. This is what GitHub looks like today. It's relatively the same product. One is 4 people in a coffee shop. The other is $7 billion, right? So like the product that we actually built, the product that we actually sold, changed very little fundamentally in the decade that we spent building it, right? It's the network that we built around it that was valuable, but the focus that we had on let's make this thing very good and not dilute that and do a lot of other things, I think played into why it was valuable in the end. And so what I want to do is look at somebody that's similar. And it's a company that we looked at a lot when we were in our board meetings, when we were discussing stuff. I was actually friends with people in Atlassian. They were right down the street. Actually, Atlassian and GitHub are a few blocks away from each other. We would go do karaoke nights together. I knew the Atlassian guys really well. They approached the same people, right? The same customer set, from a very different standpoint. And if you go to Atlassian's site, they have a bunch of different products, right? So if you go to their product thing, they have so many products that they have a link at the bottom that says view all products, because this is not all the products that they have. They have more products than this. And they have products I haven't even heard of. Like, I don't know what ITSM is. Like, do I need ITSM? Maybe I do. I don't even know. That's a product I've never heard of, but maybe I want to pay them money for ITSM. They have, Trello, they have Confluence, they have document collaboration. They have all these different things, and you pay for them all separately, and they're all kind of loosely integrated. And this is the way that they wanted to build their company, right? They see they were a Jira, right? They were a product, and they said, we can take this and we can leverage it, and we can build a bunch of things around this and provide a whole suite for everything that you might need for a company like this. And we did the opposite. We had one of these things, this code management thing that they have in Bitbucket, and we added some of this stuff sort of onto our main product, but there was only ever one thing that you could buy from GitHub, which was GitHub. It was the sort of repository thing, the repository model. And we added some stuff to it, but we never expanded out into the suite of things, right? We thought in our minds we had taste, right? That we wanted to do something very well, we had focus. And Atlassian didn't have that. They would just throw anything you would buy, they would put into their product suite and have you pay them money for, and that was fine. And we kind of made fun of it, right? That they didn't do things well, and we did things very well. And so the question is, did GitHub pivot? I would say no, but GitHub did navigate, because there were lots of things we could have done. So the way that we made the decision when things came up, should we do this or should we not do this, is we would look at our vision and we would say, does this fit within our vision or not? And I think that's actually a very helpful framework for you, right, or for anybody. If you have a company and you're making a decision and you're trying to figure out, how do I survive? What product do I do? Do we go down this route? Do we not go down this route? I think it's really helpful to have a strong vision, to have a vision that everybody in the company understands, to have a vision especially that you as the CEO or as the executive team understands, and be very specific about, does this way that we want to approach trying to make money or trying to serve our customers, does it fit within our vision? And if it doesn't, and you still want to go down that, should you still have that vision, right? And this is the vision we had. Originally, until 2013, our vision was helping people, making it easier to work better together than alone. And that was very broad, right? So that could be a lot of different things. And at some point we said, you know what, not everything that we're looking at fits within that. We want to make it more specific, and we made it, GitHub helps people build software together, which is simpler. It's very easy. It's a very easy litmus test. Anything that we're looking at working on, it was easy to say, does it help people build software together, right? And if the answer was no, maybe we shouldn't invest in it. And if the answer is yes, maybe we should focus on it. So I'm going to go through a couple of things that came across. I remember coming across our board that we got very serious on, we started spending resources on, and we decided not to do. So we decided not to pivot, right? It was something we could have done, and we could have made a lot of money on, and we decided not to do it. And because of our vision, because applying our vision to this doesn't fit, one was jobs. So one of the things that you can do with GitHub is that happens all the time. Some of you may have done this, is use it as your resume, because it has all your code on it, right? People can go and see what kind of a programmer you are. It happens constantly. People would use GitHub to find candidates or to vet candidates. And we said, what if we embraced that? What if we sort of paved the cow paths, right? Like took something that people are already using this for and made it better and made it good and productized it and made some money off of it, but also helped this big network find jobs or help people find candidates for good jobs. That would be good for the community. We actually launched this, and it's one of the only other ways that we ever made money on GitHub. We would have companies pay to post jobs. And this actually, we spent a very small amount of time on it, essentially never maintained it, and it made, at some point, $2 million a year in revenue, with almost no work whatsoever. It was completely passive for us. And so we never shut it down, and we never loved it, because we never worked on it, right? It wasn't central to what we did, and it was making too much money to just turn off. And so it just sort of languished. And and so just last week, I think, GitHub finally shut this down. They wanted to shut it down when they did the acquisition, and I think it would have changed sort of business operations or something, so they couldn't do it. So they had to wait until long enough after the acquisition to shut it down, but they finally shut it down. But at some point, we were really serious about this. We were talking to companies. We were thinking of acquiring sort of job companies and building them in and having GitHub jobs be a thing and making a lot of money and being more of a LinkedIn, right, and making all of this revenue. And we decided we don't want to do that. The money's there. It's on the table. We're already making it. We know we can make more, but we want to focus. This is not our focus. This is not what we want to do. We want to be one thing. And so we shut it down. Another was GitHub Press. I wrote a technical book at the time. If any of you have written technical books or written books, you know how bad the tool chains generally are for collaborating with people, for collaborating with the publishing company. And there's a lot of technical books. Just the whole ecosystem is very poor. And so we thought, you know, we could buy a technical publisher, get their backlog, sort of the books that they've published before, have this be GitHub Press, sort of open it up, open source it, make it easy to do, make it easy to publish and make money and stuff. And so we were going to do that, and we got far in those, and we shut down those talks, and we said, this is not helping people build software together, so we're not going to do this either. Chat is the same. Before Slack, we had our own internal chat client. We spent a lot of resources on it. You could only use it if you were a GitHub employee, and people would come in and be like, we should make a product. This is amazing. This is so much better than any, this is before Slack, right? I mean, how many of you use Slack? Probably everybody uses Slack, right? Like, it's such a big thing now, but at the time there was nothing. And we built this whole thing, and we were like, we could make this a product, and we decided the same thing. This is not within our focus. This is not helping people build software together. It does other things. It's outside of what we want to do. We want to focus on what we're good at. And so we decided not to go down the Slack route. And it's really painful now, right? Like, a lot of people, if I talk to old GitHub employees, like not GitHub employees who are now old, like GitHub employees who used to work there when I was working there, which is actually kind of synonymous. I'm pretty old. But we would talk about how we missed that opportunity, right? We were productizing something that was very similar to Slack. We could have been Slack. Slack is a huge multi-billion-dollar company now, way more than we sold GitHub for. Maybe we missed the boat on that, right? We had that vision and we didn't go through with it. And so, but you know, that wasn't our focus. And VC is the same thing, actually. We had a long, drawn-out, fighting sort of thing on do we raise venture capital or not? Because at the time we didn't need it, right? We were making money. We were profitable. We didn't need to raise money. We had 100 employees off of bootstrap money. Like, why would you raise money off of that and give somebody a percentage of the company? And we decided that it would help us grow. It would help our network. It was within our vision. And so we did raise VC, not because we needed it, but because we thought it would help what we were trying to accomplish. So these are some of the things that we had talked about at some point. At some point, there is a vision, there's a future where if our company vision was a little bit different, you could go to GitHub and you can click on products and it looks like this, right? It's more like Atlassian. We have 100 things. There's all of these things that we focused on that we could have done that were interesting to us, and that's not the way that we ended up going. And some of these, actually, GitHub employees left the company, started companies based on them, and they're now big companies, right? Like Netlify was GitHub Pages that a GitHub, I don't know if anybody's used Netlify or Sentry or Abbott, but like these are all companies where somebody from GitHub is like, you know what, I'm just going to do a company based on this thing and make this our focus and our vision and do this well. And a lot of those have done really well. And I think it can be argued, and people will argue that, I will argue sometimes, that we made the right decision because we sold the company for $7 billion. It's very hard to say that was a poor decision. But if you look at Atlassian now, where we would look at them, and every single time we looked at them, we were 3 years behind them, right? For 10 years, probably. Every time we looked at them, their revenue numbers, the number of employees they had, how, like, what their community was like, we were exactly 3 years behind them, year to year to year to year. And if you look at them today, right, they're an IPO'd company, they're worth $100 billion. So the question is, did we actually make the right choice, right? If we had expanded, if we had pivoted, if we had done all of these things, and we had all of this product, this sort of, you know, larger space, like, would we be a $100 billion company instead of a measly $7 billion company? What a stupid number, $7 billion. So should it have pivoted, right? It's impossible to know. Nobody really knows. But what I want to say, what I think is valuable to you if you're running your own company, is that it's easy for me to sleep at night. It's easy for the people involved in GitHub to know that we did the right thing because we had a vision. It was easy to make some of these decisions of saying, this is what our vision is. This fits our vision. This does not fit our vision. We all agree on this. And I think that's a very easy way. It makes it very easy to make these types of very difficult decisions if you don't have this type of framework. So I want to talk a little bit about Chatterbug. So I left GitHub and I started another company focused on learning languages called Chatterbug. This is a very different market. It's a very different type of customer. And it's a much more difficult market, right? And so I started it because it's hard to learn a language. For those of you who are native German speakers, and I'm speaking too quickly in English, I apologize. I would do this in German, but I would sound like a 5-year-old giving the speech, and you would probably not, you might find it funny, actually, but probably maybe not as interesting. But it's hard to learn a language. And I lived in Paris for a while, and I tried to learn French, and I used everything that was out there. And if you've ever tried to learn another language, you either do it in school, and it takes forever, and then you move to another country, and maybe you're immersed for a while, and you really pick it up, or you try with an app and you spend a ton of time on it and it's not really very effective because you're not listening to human beings actually speak. And if you actually do tutoring, you can take the time if you have time to go to Goethe Institute or Kaplan or something, which is fine, but that's not flexible. If you do tutoring, scheduling, there's a lot of pain involved in this. And I tried to learn a language and I said, you know what, there's definitely a market for this. And it turns out there is a market, but it's just very difficult to find. So we built this thing, Chatterbug, which, you know, there's sort of goals and activities and things to do, and it's very easy to schedule stuff, and it's so much better than everything that I had worked with before. We have all this curriculum and this sort of one-on-one classroom. I used to do language learning with Skype, where we would they would send me sort of illegally scanned PDFs and be like, go to page 83 and we'll start there. And I was like, this can't be how this works. Like, this is not a great way of doing this. And so I built something, you know, we all built something that I think is really valuable. And you can actually go on YouTube and watch me try to learn German, this big thing of watching me learn it over several years through this system. So it does work. And so it's great, right? Like, it works. But the problem is that that's not what the market that we found, right? The market that we found is that of all the marketing that we do, most people that sign up for learning a language are complete beginners, and they don't want to talk to people on the internet in a language that they don't understand. And the people that have some experience, they convert great, and that works well, but it's very, very difficult to focus on just them and to spend marketing money on just them. So we have this big problem. And so after years of trying to figure this out, of trying 100 different things, we decided, okay, we need to pivot. We need to figure out how to get these people that are coming in that are beginners to feel like they can talk to a human being. And so we thought to ourselves, how do we pivot, right? And this is something that you'll do in your company, most likely at some point. You'll have a problem, you can't figure out how to do it. You know the problem you need to solve, but how do you solve it? What's the product? Like, what actually fits the market that you're seeing, that you're paying for, that you're marketing to, that's coming in, but is not converting, is not buying your thing? Like, why is that, right? And the way I think of, so for us, we knew what we needed beginners, we needed people to spend some time to get a foothold, to feel like, you know what, my next step is I need to talk to a human being, but it's that time span, right? And how do you do that? And so there's a couple different ways. We could do a better Duolingo, right? Or Duolingo, or whatever, right, that has this thing. But again, Duolingo's problematic because if you've ever used Duolingo for a long time, you don't learn anything, right? You learn how to read, is about it. You do Duolingo for 100 hours and then go try to order a coffee and you don't understand what anybody says to you, right? And that's really the problem. You could do AI conversations or something, but you have the same problem. If you're having conversations with a computer and then you have conversations with a human being, that's not what a human being sounds like. And so we looked at our vision, and our vision is we help you learn languages from real people. Like, from day one, we want people involved, right? And it's actually conversations that I had with people coming out of GitHub. They were like, okay, this is this tech guy. He's going to want to do tech stuff. What are you doing? And I'm like, human beings. And they're like, that's not what we wanted to hear. We thought you were going to do some real PhD, you know, complex AI stuff. And I was like, no. We want to get people together so that when you learn a language doing what you want, you're practicing what you want to actually do. And so it puts out both of these. We can't do these because it doesn't fit in with our vision. And so we look around, right? Who else has solved this problem? And it turns out that for us, Peloton is interesting. It's interesting to look at other industries that do something similar, right? Who has innovated in those industries? Who has done something that is interesting in those industries? And for us, it's Peloton, and it doesn't seem, I think at first, like that would be a good match, right? Language learning and exercise, because they seem like very different things, but they're actually very similar, right? People want to be a better version of themselves somehow, right? They want to improve, and it takes a lot of hard work to do it, and they are easily convinced that it doesn't take a lot of hard work to do it, and so a lot of people buy shitty stuff on the internet that make it seem like you can do it in 5 minutes a day, and then they do it for 5 minutes a day and they fail, and then they blame themselves instead of the shitty thing that they bought on the internet, right? And so we kind of looked at this and we said, what's the difference, right? There's the sort of Goethe Institute type thing, which is a gym. You go in, you work out with other people, and you have a community, and you stick with it, not because it's so good, but because there's a lot of people around you, right? There's the community that surrounds you. And then you have home gyms that, for the most part, you buy an expensive, and then nobody ever works out on them, right? Because nobody's sitting there and watching you work out on them. You don't have that motivation And so we looked at this as a similar model to language learning, and we saw what Peloton does, which is put in a human being into your living room, right? And so it helps people feel this human connection, feel like there's somebody helping them do what they want to do, even though it's not one-on-one, even though but it is live. There is somebody doing that bike at the same time that you're doing it, and I find that very compelling, and a lot of people find that very compelling. And so we were able to kind of steal some of that, and we thought, can we do flashcards? Can we do Duolingo but have people involved? Like, is there some way of doing Duolingo with human beings that are doing it? And if any of you, you guys have probably gone to college, college, as an American I say college, to university, and there's study groups. I used to never study math. And then there'd be like study groups of people that would do math. And then I'd go and do the study group, and then I'd actually study math and learn something. And it'd be like, oh, I should probably do this more often because I'm actually learning something. And it's not because the math study is different. It's because there's people there talking to you and interacting with you, right? And I feel like the introduction of people, this is like a big thing with a lot of technology these days, is pulling people out of it makes it so difficult to follow, right? So difficult to be engaged in it, especially with language learning. And so we thought, can we do flashcards with people? And so we launched this new thing called Streams, where we're just streaming, we're doing the same thing that Peloton is doing, but helping you learn languages at the same time. And it's very interesting because it's different, right? And the reason why I think and it's been working very well for us, and it's changed the course of the company a lot, and it helps people build up some feel like it's not as much work, and build up some confidence to actually talk to somebody, and then move over into the next product that we offer. And I feel like we wouldn't have gotten there if we didn't have our vision, right? Our vision helped us figure out, what do we want to do? We want to get these beginners in, right? We know kind of what we want the goal to be, but it's difficult to go through and say, how do we want to do this? Because we could say no to things that came up as possibly good ideas because it didn't fit our vision. And I think that's a really, really helpful framework to have when you're trying to answer these big questions of, how do I move my company? Where does my company go? Because it affects everybody, right? It sinks or makes the company survive. And if you don't know why you're doing it, if you don't have a framework for how to make those decisions, I think it weighs heavily on you, and it's difficult to convince everybody in your company to put everything that they have into it. But if you have a vision and you're like, this is what we're doing, and this is why we have this vision, we want human beings involved, we want to do something like what Duolingo is able to do, but we want to have human beings as part of that, that fits what our vision is, then it's easy for everybody to get behind that. It's easier to figure out what your product should be. And I think it's a very, very helpful constraint for how to navigate your business. So our vision, both at GitHub and at Chatterbug, I think, in my experience, having a strong company vision helps us to innovate. It helps you to decide to pivot or not pivot and be confident in that choice. It helps you to figure out, where is the company going next, and whatever problems we have, how do we come up with something that fits the vision in order to move to the next step of where we need to be, and not look back and have regrets, or not figure out, is this the right thing for us to do or not? And so I'll leave you with that. Whatever it is that you're doing, whatever it is you're building, you will have to navigate. If you're successful, you have to navigate a lot of times. If you're not successful, you'll have to navigate hard a couple of times. But you will have to change what your company is doing in small or large ways, and having a company vision that you can base this on is the most helpful tool that you can have. So think about, what is your vision? So that's it. Thank you very much. I have absolutely no idea what time it is or how long I took, so I don't know if we have time for Q&A, or if not, we have a happy hour at 5 o'clock right back there, so I can also answer questions or just drink with you guys if you want. It's entirely up to you.
I want to do both. We do have time for some Q&A. Are there some questions in the room? I've got a couple that I've written down in the meantime, but let's take them from the room first. In the back, please. Nice and loud. Ja, you can quiz him in German or you can ask it in English. Das ist, wie du willst. Kannst du aufstehen, bitte?
So, my name is I'm 17 years old, and I just founded my first company.
fuck yes.
So I have a pretty crazy vision because my company is named Go For Your Dreams, and I help young people follow their vision and develop their vision. And the problem is, I'm at a pivot. People, like young people, are not very interested in building their dreams. They're interested in drinking, in partying. Should I say, oh, that's a pivot, let's stop my business, or should I continue even if it's hard? And how to pivot if it's just probably impossible, but somehow could be possible? What should I do?
Yeah, I mean, not a broad question at all. So, I come from coming out of GitHub. I come from a place of privilege, right? If I fail, then I've succeeded before, and so it's difficult for me to say just do whatever it takes because I know it can be hard, right? It's different for everybody. For me, the biggest thing is to do something that you care about, right? And so I think for the Chatterbug example, one of the things I really didn't want to do is to go down a route of do a Duolingo or something that I know I was frustrated with, something that I know doesn't work, and then try to hoodwink people, try to trick people into doing it because I know I can make money off of them, right? And I think that would have been a much easier route to do, but it's something I didn't want to go down because I want people to learn to understand spoken language, and I want to learn how to speak a language for real, and not pretend like they can, and have them fail and then pretend that it's their fault for doing it. Like that's very sad to me. And so what I would say is whatever you do, don't pivot into something that you don't care about because you think you can make it work. Figure out something else that you care about that you can make work, right? That's the only, I think, useful advice that I would have on that. But again, if you need to eat, do whatever makes money.
There's a guy named Scott Galloway in the United States. He's had a couple of very successful startups and research businesses. You should look him up. He talked a lot about the myth, and it's a controversial topic, but the myth, which is people on stage saying, follow your vision. And the problem is, and I think rightfully so, which what Scott prefaced it with, is the position of privilege that you need in order to be able to say just that line, follow your dreams, follow your, what makes you perfect, right? Without having the second sentence underneath it that has some kind of future underpinning that you can make a living from, especially if you're not coming from, a business that you've sold or a position of privilege where you can simply get by. It's the combination of those two. His name, like I said, his name is Scott Galloway. I would encourage you to check it out. Please. Who else? Who else has a question? In the back, please.
Yes, very short question, please. What is your number one advice in terms of hiring people?
My number one advice in terms of hiring people. So I think the biggest thing that I've learned is to hire positive people. I think of all of the things I've hired, I mean, it's very difficult to hire, right? Because no matter what you do, you're trying to judge how somebody will do over the span of several years in lots of different circumstances in the course of a couple of hours, in very artificial circumstances, and it's hard to do. And I think in the long term, when things are hard, or when things are easy, that really negative people make sort of poison the well and make it really difficult on everybody in an environment that would otherwise work. So I think attitude is actually a huge driver for success in a team, because I've hired people that are very, very smart but very negative, and you're like, it's going to make up for it, right? They're going to be so productive that it's going to make up for it. But one person isn't good at almost anything, right? Like, you really need a team. And if somebody doesn't work well on a team, then somebody doesn't work well for the company, no matter how productive that they are. And it's really, really difficult to say team fit or something, right? Because that can be so biased and so difficult. But I think positivity, right, is relatively easy to mention, right? Are they saying bad things about their previous company, or are they kind of generally negative about things, right? Or are they very, very positive about what they can do and what the company can do? And again, it's a gut thing, and it's a difficult bias to figure out how to do it well, and it's impossible to test for. But but that's one of the main it drains on productivity in companies that I've seen, is one person can really bring down a large group pretty quickly.
I can only second that. It's a perfect answer, in my opinion. The toxic culture is lethal, and it only takes one in order to kind of poison the well, as you've said. There's a friend of mine, his name is Lucas Kircher. He founded Kircher Burkhardt, which became Seit, in Berlin. It's a content marketing agency. He had a huge a sign in his office which said "No assholes," and he dared to put it in his office as a signal of why we would work together, of what was really important, and that "no asshole" rule made a big difference in terms of the team structure and the people that they decided to hire. I think that it fits nicely with what you're saying, and is definitely a good rule to follow. Who else has a question? So I've got one. We've got a couple of extra minutes. Sure. I wrote down the words, the Amazon paradox, because you talked about doing one thing and doing one thing really well. And you've got Amazon, which is obviously an exception to the rule since they're so gigantic. But there's a couple ways of seeing Amazon, right? One is that they started selling books and then decided to sell everything. But maybe that was the strategy. So it's not really a change of vision.
Yeah.
But then if that's the case, then how do you explain AWS? How do you explain advertising?
Yeah.
Where it's not really pivots. It's a whole different way of seeing an organization.
I mean, it's a great question, and it depends on what they thought that their vision was as well, right? So, like, and I don't know. I don't know at the time sort of what that was. I mean, for Atlassian, I think in this example is interesting as well. They approached it very, very differently, right? They were like, we are gonna, whatever our customers want, we're gonna give them something and try to solve their problems. And they're great people. I love everybody I have lots of friends of Atlassian. I don't particularly like using their products myself, but I'm also incredibly biased. But their vision worked as well, right? But it's I think the question is, from somebody that's leading a company, how do you know this is a good decision or this is not a good decision, and have confidence in that fact and to move forward confidently in that fact. And so having a vision that I think helps you have that framework of, do I do this or do I not? Do I put a lot of resources on this? Do I put the company on the line in some cases or not, right? And in Amazon's case, obviously AWS was kind of way off, but also, I could see it could be argued that internally that really helps their economies of scale or whatever, right? That they're an economy of scale company, and that's something they were doing anyways, and it'll help them be better at their own internal logistics if they're making sure that external companies are testing their infrastructure, et cetera, et cetera. So it's really, really hard to say.
It's a hard one, right?
Yeah, it's a hard one. But it's also at a huge scale that becomes a problem, right? Like, if you're at a small or medium business, you don't really have do we take this thing and make it into its own multi-billion-dollar company under our wing or not? So if you are, it's a great problem to have. Okay.
Anybody else in the room? Anything at all? We got one more, because we have time.
Sure,
yeah,
sure.
So we'll take a small break after this one, but I'm going to challenge you just for the hell of it. I don't want to debate semantics too much, but explain to us why streams, you consider streams as a product to be more of a pivot and not a product improvement. Why it's maybe inside of this idea of navigation, as opposed to pivoting the business around something that might feel like a product improvement.
Yeah, and so the main thing in that is deciding as a company to not do, we're going to roll this out slowly and see if it works and test it, but to have an all hands meeting and say, whatever you're working on, your job now is streams. Figure out a way to fit into this vision. Figure out what you can do to make this work. We're going to launch it as quickly as possible. We're going to test it as quickly as possible. essentially almost nobody. I mean, you can see everybody with a blue shirt and a cat bee on their chest now. You can talk to them at 5 o'clock and say, "What were you doing before, and what are you doing after?" Right? Because almost everybody massively changed what they were doing, and it's very difficult, right? If you have even a company of I think 40 people to say, "Okay, we're doing something completely different tomorrow." And what does that look like? And trying to convince everybody this is a good idea, right?
So it's the difference between experimentation and commitment.
Exactly.
I guess.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah, because it's very easy. That is another way you can go, right? Is be like, we'll do 10% of the resources of the company,
Let's just
and we'll
play
spend a
around with
year,
this thing.
and we'll see if it works, and it's really hard, or we'll completely stop everything that we're doing, and we'll put all of our resources into this new thing, and this is the new future of the company, right? Can we make this work?
Cool.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. Maybe I'll see some of you at 5.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Scott, very much.